So, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the project that I'm putting together for Speak Percussion. And there's sort of two parts to this. So the first part is looking a little bit at how I might go about the score. And then the second part will be looking at how I'm going to be using the tech with the viola and making use of all of those things that I've talked of previously with JackTrip. So the score, you might remember I was talking about the Decibel ScorePlayer earlier, and you would have seen some cutaway shots of it, of cat scores, but now I'm going to show some of my scores. So this is one of the first graphic notation scores that I created. It's called Glisten, and it was for part of Decibel's 2 Minutes from Home project. So during the pandemic, we sort of decided to commission 20 composers. So 6 members of the group plus 14 other composers, all of whom we'd worked with previously, to create these short 2-minute scrolling animated graphic notation scores. And then we were able to record them all individually at home, hence the project title, and then have them layered together. And so there's a sort of website that you can go to which has all of these on it, and we've also performed them since live, most recently at the Melbourne Recital Centre. But this was my contribution to it, and you can see basically I've scanned a whole lot of jewellery and compiled it into a score. And this is what the audience sees. So for the performers, if I just swipe up, you'll see that they have individual parts with individual instructions and their specific pieces of jewellery highlighted. So this is the string part, and you'll see at the start, if I can bring it back, oh there it is. If I bring it back to the start, you'll see that it's viola and cello. This is what's the score again? That's the flute and bass clarinet part, and they don't do a huge amount at the beginning other than these key clicks where these metal discs are. But they have more to do later. Once we get through to here, you'll see that those are the parts that they're playing. And then finally, we have our percussion part. So if I go back to the score and I set this, if I just hit reset here and then play, it is really not liking my fingers today. There we go. Oops. So you'll see we had those clicks at the start so that when we combined all the videos together, it was easy to make sure that everyone was exactly in sync. And then you'll just see it scrolls past like that. And hopefully you can hear there's an audio track included with it as well. And so I made that, the sound that you're hearing there is one of the chains just being moved across a table. And if I'll just move ahead a bit so you can hear how it progresses. There we go. So you can start to hear that sort of jingling sound of some of the jewellery being sort of just moved around and scrunched around together. It gradually builds up to a crescendo there, to an ultimate climax. But that was just a short 2-minute piece for the 2 Minutes from Home project. Not all of the graphic scores that I create are like that, and that sort of, with that sort of attention to aesthetic. Some of them are a lot more functional. So for example, this one, Our Place, there's not much to look at. It's really just a bunch of very long staves with some traditional music notation. So you'll see that there are these long held notes, and I've used standard staves because I want specific pitches for each of the instruments to play. And once again, the reason to put it in this sort of scrolling form is because a lot of these notes are very long drones. There's a whole, if I can find it eventually, glissando, whole section of glissandi. The ciccadas there are in the audio track, and they become deafening and take over from the instrumentalists. But a lot of these sort of, long, repeated sort of drone notes. And then these other repeated motifs that happen above it. So it was just an easy way to write it for a group of performers who are, once again, in this case, recording it separately because it was for an audio-visual piece. Everyone was just doing a portrait to camera, and we needed to be able to film separately. Once again, there's also an audio track that this syncs up to, and by being in the score player, it makes sure that the instrumentalists are playing exactly where I want them to against the backing audio. So if I play just a little bit of this, you can hear there are all these sorts of ocean sounds. That might be the version with the violin part embedded in it because we had a violinist short for the initial, the premiere of the piece, the live performance in the gallery that opened the installation. But it's made up the audio track of all of these sounds from the natural world. So the performers who are involved in the project, I got them to submit videos from the places they lived, from the places they were from, and from places that were significant to them, with a bit of a focus on waterways because that was the theme of the overall exhibition that the piece was part of. And so for my part, because I'm from Perth, but there was no way I was getting back there during the pandemic, I say that, but then I went to conduct the WA Opera just before I thought of doing this for the project. So I could have filmed some stuff, missed that opportunity, but went on a day trip with friends out to Lala Falls and got some really beautiful footage from there, as well as some footage from just around Monash and the sort of wetlands that exist as part of just near the campus there. Other members of the ensemble, our cellist Preston Clifton got some amazing footage from Albany, from the Gap, from the beaches around there. Deborah Cheetham got footage from the beaches around the bay in Melbourne. Alara Briggs-Patterson had some amazing bird sounds from Yorta Yorta country, right near the border between Victoria and New South Wales. This sort of dusk or dawn chorus, I can't remember which it was, but just really beautiful footage that was sort of interspersed with these portraits of the players. And it's the audio from those that went into that soundtrack there. And of course, as I was mentioning, those deafening cicadas, which were captured by other cellist Jackson Worley. So for the Speak project, I'll basically be creating a score like that. Most likely it'll be a scrolling score which isn't just staves, there'll be some sort of artistic component to it. At the moment, that's how it's planned to be. But I'm hoping to write a new mode for the score player so that as well as that scrolling background, occasionally at times, there can be just a static image that appears above it. So that way I'll be able to get sort of the best of both of those worlds. So where, for example, the specific pictures aren't as crucial, I'll be able to use this sort of purely graphic notation. And then for sections where I really want to care about the exact harmonic language that's being used, I can sort of have snippets of music appearing. And it'll be for percussion and viola. So there'll be, once again, a score plus individual parts for that. So for my part, there'll be different fragments of music that pop up compared to, I imagine it'll be Eugene playing it, but Eugene's part for the percussion. And the really cool thing about it is that we'll also be using JackTrip, even though in this case, both of the performers are in the room. So one of the, I guess, research projects that Chris Chafe has been involved in, he's at CAMA, which is the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics at Stanford, and he's one of the original developers of JackTrip. So one of his research projects kind of formed the inspiration for this piece. Effectively, he had this internet reverb project. So he would take signals from various nodes on the internet. Well, he would set up various nodes at points on the internet, send a signal out to them, and then it would be reflected back. Much as if you were in, say, this room, I'm talking, the sound from my voice is reflecting off the various walls, and it's creating this sort of, I guess, reverb profile for the room, and it's what gives the room its sound. In the virtual space, if you apply that same concept, and instead of walls you have these different nodes, they become the new reflective surfaces. And depending on how far away you are, what the internet conditions are like, exactly how much delay is happening there, you'll get sort of, I guess, this sort of different virtual geometries that happen that create this really sort of virtual online space that reacts like a room. And effectively, that's partly what we're doing with this project here. So the plan will be to send my viola signal, and you can see I've got a little pickup on it, which I'll be demonstrating later, but have that processed by the laptop. So sometimes it'll just be the raw audio signal that goes through. Other times I'll be manipulating it. One of the most basic manipulations, as you'll see, being shifting it up and down pitches, particularly octaves. That'll get sent out to these various points around the country where I'll have sent one of these little things. So this is a Raspberry Pi. For those of you who haven't come across it, it's effectively an entire computer on a single board. You just need to plug in a network cable, a keyboard, and a monitor, and it's good to go. And so at these various points around the country, there'll be people who are partnering with us to deliver the performance, and they'll each have one of these. And the signal will be sent to them and then echoed back to us. And so we'll get a different sort of feeling of reverb or potentially delay, because I'll also be able to artificially inflate the latency that happens here, just so that we can exaggerate it at times. But it'll be based really around, as the differing delays that happen from each of these endpoints. But really cool device. They're only, I think the original ones were aimed to be about $30 for a computer. These ones, this is the 4th generation of them. They're a little bit more expensive than that, but they're really cool for any sort of embedded art projects or music projects or things like that. Slightly similar to, you might have come across Arduinos before as well, but these are a little more full-featured because they are an entire computer on a board. And you can even run full audio processing software on them, things like C-Sound, Pure Data, and those sorts of audio programming languages. But really nifty device. So we'll be using JackTrip to, as I was saying, send a signal out to these various nodes, have it reflect back, and then have it played in the space. But how it's played in the space will sort of vary throughout the work. So sometimes it might just come back out straight through the speakers positioned around the room. Other times, it'll come back and be played out through these little transducers. And so there are these little, effectively they act just like speakers, but contact speakers, kind of like this contact mic, but in reverse. So they'll sit up against, for example, we've tried them with all different percussion instruments. I was trying one with a floor tom, bass drum, a tam-tam, which works really well, cymbals, which we didn't think would work so well, but worked surprisingly well, and basically playing the viola signal through these different percussion instruments. So it sort of activates the percussion instrument, it vibrates it in kind of a similar fashion as it would if you were to strike it, but of course it's a different physical impact, and so it sets up a different series of vibrations in it. Sometimes, for example, when you're playing it through a snare drum, there'll be times where it just sounds like the note of the instrument, and then other times where it really engages that snare sound. With the cymbals, you get this really sort of very metallic sound, and so if you sort of, a really cool example that came up in the development period was just playing a plucked note, a pizzicato on the viola, playing that down 2 octaves through a floor tom and up 2 octaves through a cymbal. And it creates this really amazing sort of hybrid instrument sound. And if you then pair that with various degrees of latency and echo, you'll have, and the plan is to have multiple percussion stations throughout the room, with the audience sort of more in the middle of things. You'll get this sort of spatialised movement of this sound combined with the original viola playing. So I don't have any transducers or percussion instruments here to demonstrate that today, but I can just quickly show you in Max how this sort of works and what will happen here. And I shouldn't speak too close to the mic because it's going to pick it up and echo what I'm saying, as you can hear now. But I've set a delay on both of these pitch shifting lines that I've got, just so that you can hear it distinctly from the viola itself. So 4 seconds after I play a note, we should hear a sound that's an octave lower, if I've got this right. And 6 seconds later, we'll hear a sound that's an octave higher. So if I pluck this, there it is. There we go. And so then, as I was saying, those sounds can be played through percussion instruments. A really awesome one was playing it down a few octaves through this massive aluminium thunder sheet that was sort of suspended from the ceiling. And it really creates this amazing sort of rumbling bass effect. And of course I can play stuff with the bow as well. Oh, and you can hear it's slightly feeding back, so there's echoes of echoes of echoes. But that'll be sort of the tech behind how it works. So there's just this max, and I'm going to stop at processing audio so I stop hearing my voice digitally altered. But it's sort of, I've set this up at the moment as a bit of a playground where I can effectively just play around with these different effects, sending it through to different transducers at different octaves. In addition to that, there's a couple of, I'll put my sound audio processing back on for this, just putting this far enough away. There's a couple of click generators here. So if I turn those on, I can send like a click sound to some of the percussion instruments. And depending on exactly the waveform that I've set up for that click, that'll have different effects on the instrument. Here's another. You can hear that's both clicks, one much higher pitched, and they activate the percussion instruments in different ways, particularly things like tam-tams, which will then resonate on from that initial click. So that's an option that I've got at my disposal as well. And then in the top right corner here, I've got this little feedback system. So one of the things that we found that worked really well in the workshop as well is actually deliberately making feedback happen. And I've got a little bit of programming here that pays attention to how loud the signal is and sort of rides the level of the feedback. So it doesn't let it get out of control and to ear-piercing levels. It'll bring the volume down if it starts to get too loud, and then if it starts to get too soft, it'll bring it back up. So it sort of creates this sort of sustained feedback sound. Normally you'd be used to hearing feedback just out of speakers with a speaker and microphone. In this case, it's through the transducers with a microphone. So in parts of the work, what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to get Eugene to hold a microphone up to, for example, a tam-tam. I keep going back to it. It's such a great instrument, such, so many different colors and sounds to explore on it. But get him to hold the microphone up to the tam-tam, and that'll start to feed back into the transducer, which then creates more sound on the tam-tam. And it's really interesting as you move it across different parts of the surface, the different frequencies of sound, the different notes and different pitches that sort of really come to the foreground. So it's really, there's probably going to be a few moments in the piece, because it's a fairly long durational piece, but a few moments in the piece where there are just these feedback solos, where it'll be a chance for Eugene to really just explore the sound that comes from deliberately inducing feedback in these percussion instruments. Works really well with I think the floor toms work really well as well. There's a bit of I have to tweak some of the parameters because they're much more inclined to run away and really get very loud very quickly. But once I've got those values right, it'll just create this nice sustained sort of rumble. And also sort of, it picks up the resonant frequencies of the drum as well. So it's not just a rumble, there's actually sort of a bit of a pitch profile to it as well. But a lot of exciting things to explore in the sort of intersection between technology, both within the space in terms of the viola sound moving into the percussion instruments and creating these beautiful, just hybrid instruments of the imagination, really. And also these ideas of just the sound exploring the vastness of the Australian landscape and being bounced back from really remote points across the land. So looking forward to actually getting a chance to continue writing it and developing it. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of programming on that front, a little bit of programming on this front, but that's starting to get there, to really just pull this into, well, from this initial concept into a structured and interesting and engaging piece. So thanks everyone for listening to me ramble on. Additionally, there'll be a short video after this as well if you want to just learn a little bit more about how you might be able to play with JackTrip at home and some of the setup process behind that. Thanks.